During the fall of the year 1827, while residing near Charlottesville, Virginia, I casually made the acquaintance of Mr. Augustus Bedloe. This young gentleman was remarkable in every respect, and excited me in a profound interest and curiosity. I found it impossible to comprehend him either in his moral or his physical relations. Of his family I could obtain no satisfactory account. Whence he came I never ascertained, even about his age, although I could call him a young gentleman. There was something which perplexed me in no little degree. He certainly seemed young, and he made a point of speaking about his youth, yet there were moments when I should have had little trouble in imagining him 100 years of age. But in no regard was he more peculiar than in his personal appearance. He was singularly tall and thin. He stooped much. His limbs were exceedingly long and emaciated. His forehead was broad and low. His complexion was absolutely bloodless. His mouth was large and flexible, and his teeth were more wildly uneven, although sound, than I had ever seen before teeth in a human head. The expression of his smile, however, was by no means unpleasing, as might be supposed, but it had no variation whatever. It was one of profound melancholy, of a faceless and unceasing gloom. His eyes were abnormally large, round, like those of a cat. The pupils, too, upon any accession of diminution of light, underwent contraction or dilation, just as is observed in the feline tribe. In moments of excitement, the orbs grew bright to a degree almost inconceivable, ceasing to emit luminous rays, not of a reflected, but of an intrinsic luster, as does a candle or the sun. Yet their ordinary condition was so totally vapid, filmy, and dull as to convey the idea of the eyes of a long interred corpse. These peculiarities of a person appeared to cause him much annoyance, and he was continually alluding to them in a sort of half-explanatory, half-apologetic strain, which, when I first heard it, impressed me very painfully. I soon, however, grew accustomed to it, and my uneasiness wore off. It seemed to be his design rather to insinuate than to directly to assert that physically he had not always been what he was. That a long series of neuralgic attacks had reduced him from a condition of more usual personal beauty than that to which I saw. For many years past he had been attended by a physician named Templeton, an old gentleman, perhaps 70 years of age, whom he had first encountered at Saratoga, and from whose attention, while there, he either received or fancied that he received great benefit. The result was that Bedloe, who was wealthy, made an arrangement with Dr. Templeton, by which the latter, in consideration of a liberal annual allowance, had consented to devote his time and medical experience exclusively to the care of the invalid. Dr. Templeton had been a traveler in his younger days, and at Paris had become a convert in great measure to the doctrine of Mesmer. It was altogether by means of magnetic remedies that he succeeded in alleviating the acute pains of his patient. And this success had very naturally inspired the latter with a certain degree of confidence in the opinions from which the remedies had been educed. The doctor, however, like all enthusiasts, had struggled to make a thorough convert of his pupil, and finally so far gained his point as to induce the sufferer to submit to numerous experiments. By a frequent repetition of these, a result had risen, which of late days had become so common to attract little or no attention, but which, at the period of which I write, have been very rarely seen known in America. I mean to say that between Dr. Templeton and Bedloe, there had grown up little by little a very distinct and strongly marked rapport, or magnetic relation. I'm not prepared to assert, however, that this rapport extended beyond the limits of the simple sleep-producing power, but this power itself had attained great intensity at the first attempt to induce the magnetic somnolency. The mesmerist entirely failed. In the fifth or sixth, he had succeeded very partially, and after a long continued effort, only at the 12th was the triumph complete. After this, the will of the patient succumbed rapidly to that of the physician, so that when I first became acquainted with the two, sleep was brought almost instantaneously by the mere volition of the operator, even when the invalid was unaware of his presence. It is only now, in the year 1845, when similar miracles are witnessed daily by thousands, that I venture to record this apparent impossibility as a matter of serious fact. The temperature of Bedloe was in the highest degree sensitive, excitable, enthusiastic. His imagination was singularly vigorous and creative, and no doubt it derived additional force from the habitual use of morphine, which he swallowed in great quantity, and without which he would have found it impossible to exist. It was his practice to take a very large dose of it immediately after breakfast each morning, or rather immediately after a cup of strong coffee, for he ate nothing in the forenoon, and then set forth alone, or attended only by a dog, along a long ramble among the chain of wild and dreary hills that lie westward and southward of Charlottesville, and are there dignified by the title of the Rackham Mountains. Upon a dim, warm, misty day toward the close of November, and during the strange interregnum of the seasons in which in America is deemed the Indian summer, Mr. Bedloe departed as usual for the hills. The day passed, and he did not return. About 8 o'clock at night, having become seriously alarmed at his protracted absence, we were about setting out in search of him, when he unexpectedly made his appearance, in health no worse than usual, and in rather more than ordinary spirits. The account which he gave of his expedition and of the events which had detained him was a singular one indeed. "You will remember," he said, "that it was about 9 in the morning when I left Charlottesville. I bent my steps immediately to the mountains, and about 10 entered a gorge which was entirely new to me. I followed the windings of this pass with much interest. The scenery which presented itself on all sides, although scarcely entitled to be called grand, had about it an indescribable and to me a delicious aspect of dreary desolation. The solitude seemed to be absolutely virgin. I could not help believing that the green sods and the gray rocks upon which I had trod had been trodden never before by the foot of a human being, so entirely secluded as, and in fact inaccessible except by me through a series of accidents, is the entrance of the ravine, that it is by no means impossible that I was indeed the first venturer, the very first and sole adventurer who had ever penetrated its recesses. The thick and peculiar mist or smoke which distinguishes the Indian summer, and which now hung heavily over all objects, served no doubt to deepen the vague impressions of which these objects created. So dense was this pleasant fog that I could at no time see more than a dozen yards of the path before me. This path was excessively sinuous, and as the sun could not be seen, I soon lost all idea of the direction in which I journeyed. In the meantime, the morphine had its customary effect, that of the enduring all the external with the world with an intensity of interest, in the quivering of a leaf, in the hue of a blade of grass, in the shape of a trefoil, in the humming of a bee, in the gleaming of a dewdrop, in the breathing of the wind, in the faint odors that came from the forest. There came a whole universe of suggestion, a gay and motley train of rhapsodical, immethodical thought. Visiting this, I walked on for several hours, during which the mist deepened around me so great an extent that at length I was reduced to an absolute groping of the way. And now an indescribable uneasiness possessed me, a species of nervous hesitation and tremor. I feared to tread lest I should be precipitated into some abyss. I remember too strange stories told about these ragged hills, and of the uncouth and fierce races of men who tended to their groves and caverns. A thousand vague fancies oppressed and disconcerted me, fancies the more distressing because vague. Very suddenly my attention was arrested by the loud beating of a drum. My amazement was, of course, extreme. A drum in these hills was a thing unknown. I could not have been more surprised at the sound of the trumpet of the archangel. But a new and still more astounding source of interest was when perplexity arose. There came a rattling and jingling sound as if of a bunch of keys, and upon the instant of a dusky-visaged and half-naked man rushed past me with a shriek. He came so close to my person that I could feel his hot breath upon my face. He bore in one hand an instrument composed of an assembly of steel rings, and shook them vigorously as he ran. Scarcely he had disappeared in the mist, and shook him before, panting after him, with open mouth and glaring eyes, there darted a huge beast. I could not be mistaken in its character. It was a hyena. The sight of this monster rather relieved than heightened my terrors, for I now made sure that I dreamed, and endeavored to arouse myself to waking consciousness. I stepped boldly and briskly forward. I rubbed my eyes. I called aloud. I pinched my limbs. A small spring of water presented itself to my view, and here stooping, I bathed my hands and head and neck. This seemed to dissipate the equivocal sensations which had hitherto annoyed me. I arose, as I thought, a new man, and proceeded steadily and complacently on my unknown way. At length, quite overcome by exertion, and by a certain oppressive closeness of the atmosphere, I seated myself beneath a tree. Presently there came a feeble gleam of sunshine, and the shadow of the leaves of the tree fell faintly but definitely upon the grass. At the shadow I gazed wonderingly for many minutes. Its character stupefied me with astonishment. I looked upward. The tree was a palm. I now arose hurriedly in a state of fearful agitation, for the fancy that I dreamed would serve me no longer. I felt that I had perfect command of my senses, and that these senses now brought to my soul a world of novel and singular sensation. The heat became all at once intolerable. A strange odor loaded the breeze. A low, continuous murmur like that of arising from a full, but gently flowing river came to my ears, intermingled with the peculiar hum of multitudinous human voices.